Welcome to Born Curious, the podcast from Harvard Radcliffe Institute, where we explore the unexpected connections that shape careers and lives. I'm your co-host, Evelise Estrada.
And I'm your co-host, Heather Min. Today, we bring you a conversation with the journalist, author, and explorer, Devi Lockwood. And for this episode, our producer, Alan Gracioso, steps in as guest host.
That's right, Alan took to the road to Dartmouth College, marking the first Born Curious episode recorded outside our studio here at Radcliffe.
Devi's journey began as a Harvard undergraduate, where a Carol K. Pforzheimer student research grant led her to our Schlesinger Library, and an unexpected friendship with the poet Cora Brooks. That experience sparked her passion for archives and storytelling, one that later took her around the world.
After graduation, a fellowship enabled Devi to travel to 6 continents over 5 years, often by bicycle, collecting stories on climate, water, and culture. This resulted in her book, 1001 Voices on Climate Change, everyday stories of flood, fire, drought, and displacement from around the world. Now, she's the commentary and ideas editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
So, without further ado, here's Alan in conversation with Devi Lockwood.
Hey Debbie, welcome to Born Curious.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's dive right in, and let's start right at the beginning. Do you remember what first drew you to the archives at the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe?
I think I first wandered into the Radcliffe Schlesinger Library my freshman year at Harvard. That fall, I was taking a mandatory freshman writing seminar, and mine was all about suburbia, which I don't think I was all that interested in the topic of suburbia, but I was fascinated as soon as we got into the archives. And so first we were in the Houghton Library, and I saw typewritten manuscripts of Anne Sexton's poems that she had put through a typewriter and then crossed out words and written things in pencil on the side. And I thought, oh my goodness, here are poems that I absolutely love as a word nerd. And it was just this opportunity to engage with, I could really feel the spirit of the writer kind of lifting off of the page. And so I ended up at the Schlesinger Library because Anne Sexton's recordings of tapes, I believe, with her psychologist or psychiatrist are archived there. And you can't access those unless you get permission from her daughter, Linda Gray Sexton, who is a writer as well. So I emailed Linda Gray and asked if I might have access to it. And she wrote back that, no, I think this is beyond the scope of a freshman seminar paper. But I got into the library. And as soon as I was there, I started talking with reference librarians. And there was a sign up about some kind of undergraduate research fellowship that you could apply for. And I was like, well, I wonder what work of female poets are archived here at the Schlesinger. And sat down with a lovely reference librarian who was so deeply kind to me. And we came up with a list of 13 female poets whose work was archived. And I started alphabetically by last name with Cora Brooks and never got to anyone else because I was so fascinated with this woman's life and stories. The reference room, for people who haven't been in it before, it's cold, it's quiet. They've since remodeled the ground floor of the library. I noticed when I was at my 10-year reunion, but there used to be all these lockers down there, and so you couldn't bring anything up except a pencil and some loose sheets of paper. And so I felt like I was kind of shedding myself behind and then walking up into this completely different space and time. And the librarians come up with the box that you've requested on a cart. And so I was just elbow deep in this woman's life story. There's something so tactile about archives that are hard to explain to somebody who hasn't been there, right? But this is, the physical piece of paper that a person wrote on. You can see the curve of their handwriting and the places where they crossed something out, or, maybe didn't finish a sentence, or, um, ways that Cora was noticing things about her daughter Una as she grew, and just beautiful, beautiful things. And so it felt, very intimate in a way. Like, I knew that there was a whole complex, beautiful human being within those pages. And of course, you only know a little tiny slice of somebody from an archive, right? We are all multifaceted humans, and not everything can be captured on a piece of paper. But I felt so clearly her presence there, and her spirit and her fire and her spunk and her determination to leave the world a better place than she found it. She was for years also protesting the Vermont nuclear Yankee power plant. And there was just this determination that I saw within her. And I was so eager to just spend more time with her. I looked forward to those hours that I spent in the archive, and I found myself carving out more and more time just to be fully present in that space, because within that library, it felt like the rest of the world was falling away, but I was having a conversation with a human being who had a lot to teach me. And I think that, especially in that time of our early, late teens, early 20s, but I was a teenager, right? I craved that wisdom, knowledge, direction. I think we all do to a certain extent at different ages, right? My desire to have intergenerational friendships hasn't changed now that I'm in my 30s. But I know that the time that I spent just kind of getting to know Cora's life within the archives shaped me into the person who I am today.
Devi, you described the archives almost like a portal to another time. Was there a specific moment when you felt that connection? Like you were truly stepping into Cora's world?
Yeah, I think I just thought she was really cool. And I was like, who is this person? I want to be her friend. She just sounds like a total badass. And I saw something in this spark that, yes, I deeply admired, and that was so present from the way that her life was depicted on these pages, and how she was telling her life story on her own terms, right? And creating tangible impact too for women suffering from domestic violence in rural areas of Vermont. Um, and I just wanted to know her. Yeah. So I guess I thought of her in a way as a heroine, but also just like a grounded, like, fascinating individual who was doing work that had an impact and that mattered, and was being so creative about how she did it. And more than anything, I was curious, and that's what I've tried to do throughout my life, is just follow my curiosity, because generally when I do that, things tend to work out in a fun way, right? And getting into that, I think people call it the flow state, right? Of like, okay, where time and space just melt away and you're fully present in whatever the task is that you're doing. If I were to give, advice to any 19-year-olds listening to this, or folks who are at a similar stage that I was, is find more of what makes you feel that way, and then find more ways of doing that. And for me, it was just being present in the archives, and then showing up and getting to meet Cora. It just added this whole level of like depth and richness to our interaction that made me feel more alive. And I feel that, to an extent, I've been chasing that feeling ever since.
So interesting. Tell us more about these badass stories that really hooked you.
And I was reading through her diaries. She started a hotline for survivors of domestic abuse in rural Vermont. And she or her friends would take these women in for the amount of time that they needed help. And she also staged really beautiful and creative protests. For example, in the Vietnam War, when that draft was announced, she thought it was unconstitutional and that people should not be signing up. And she set up a one-woman protest at the post office in Chelsea, Vermont, where she was living at the time, and goes into great detail in letters she'd written and her diaries about how the postmistress was having an affair with the chief of police. And so, small town drama, right? But Cora would have a conversation with every person who came into the post office about why they should not sign up for the draft. And the postmistress was getting pretty fed up with this. So she called the chief of police to come over and arrest her. And Cora said, this is, public property. I am exercising my rights. And they went to handcuff her. And Cora was a very tiny woman. And so the handcuffs just slid right off of her wrists. And so she turned around and gave them back to the chief of police and said, these don't work on me. And
Wow.
I mean, that's just, I think, Cora Brooks in a nutshell. She was a poet. She believed fiercely in the power of language, but also in just making her vision of the world come alive through like the living poetry of protest, of daily action. And as soon as I realized she was still alive, which is rare for an archive, right? Generally, people donate their papers after they've passed. And it had so happened that Cora had been diagnosed with something, I want to say 20 years earlier, that was supposed to kill her within a matter of months. And so a friend of hers up in Vermont named Mary Gangemi, who is a librarian as well, knew of the Schlesinger and encouraged Cora to donate her papers there. And Cora was thrilled. She said, "Ooh, I got into Harvard, It was a big deal." And yeah, she just kept living. So her life continued, and which is so beautiful for me because as a student there, I realized this. Like, oh my God, I want to invite her to come give a talk or something. Wouldn't that be fun just to interact with this woman in person whose diaries I've been reading for, a big, big chunk of her life? And so I wrote her a letter very carefully on one of those loose sheets of paper asking if she might come. And she wrote back immediately on a postcard that she had watercolor painted, I believe. She was always watercolor painting postcards, which is something I do now to kind of carry that legacy forward. It makes me happy. But she wrote back and said, Debbie, I'm much too old to come to Harvard, but you should come and visit me. And so that winter, I convinced my parents to let me borrow their Volvo and drove up from where we were living in Connecticut at the time, all the way to Montpelier, Vermont. It was my first time driving on the highway alone.
You'd been reading her personal letters and diaries, and then suddenly you stepped into her home. Did she match the image you built in your mind from the archives?
Gosh, it felt so beautiful being in her home on 3 Cumming Street in Montpelier, Vermont. It was right by the water. She has a cat who had a different name every time I came to visit, whether it was Sir Charles or Zebra Tattoo. And her back door was propped open with an old book. And yeah, she taught me how to make bread. We slowed down, just talked about life. There's no cell service at her house. And so it was just this deep alternate reality, it felt like. And we built over the course of many years a really deep friendship. And I think what's beautiful to me now is, even though she's gone, there are elements of that friendship that continue. Just a small example, when I was living in New York City before the pandemic. I lived in 3 places in the 9 months I lived there before lockdown. Is pretty chaotic. But the last of those places, in one of the first nights, I got locked out of the apartment in winter in only my bathrobe and a pair of boots. And I had my phone with me, and so I was texting my mom and just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? None of the roommates are home. There's a party going on in Bushwick. I could find a way to get a lift to this party, but I'm going to be showing up in my boots and a bathrobe, and that's, not exactly what I want to be happening right now. And she texted me, and she's like, well, what would Cora do? And I thought, oh my goodness, Cora would laugh so hard. And then I just started laughing at myself, and it made that kind of situation so much better because I could find the humor and the joy in it. And I mean, there's so many gifts of intergenerational friendships, but I think that that's one of them.
That's amazing. I really love that. Cora's influence even helped you laugh at being locked out in a bathrobe. Do you think Cora's sense of humor was a big part of what made your friendship so special?
Yeah, yeah. She was just always cheering me on to kind of continue following my inner voice, and I did something sort of wild that people call brave now, and looking back on it, it's like, I don't know, I guess I just felt like I had to, right? But after graduating, I was really graduating from Harvard as an undergrad. I was really fortunate to get a grant for a year of purposeful wandering after graduation. And my senior thesis, which I had done the summer before, was riding my bicycle 800 miles down the Mississippi River and recording stories from people I met along the way. And what happened was the farther down the river I rode my bicycle, the more stories I was hearing, specifically about water and climate change. And I thought it would be really powerful because this was 2013. The conversation about climate change was really different then. It just wasn't something, it was so much on people's radar. I thought it'd be really powerful to put those stories in dialogue with stories from other parts of the world who are dealing with similar issues. And so I applied for and got this grant for the purposeful wandering after graduation. And 1 year turned into 5, and I was traveling for about 2.5 years on my bicycle, and then 2.5 years not, and recording stories from people on every inhabited continent. And Cora used a landline and had a radio that was always playing NPR in her house. And I would call her landline when the time zones worked out, just to update her on how things were going. And she told me that at the end of her life, she felt like she was traveling too, and she loved hearing all the stories that I was hearing or the updates or, sometimes I would sing to her or just, enjoy being fully present, and I always loved hearing about what was happening in her life too. So, yeah, it was just this kind of continued dialogue that we had, and I feel, there's a lot of different ways because we're talking about, Radcliffe, right? There's a lot of different ways of being a woman in the world, right? And I think one of the beautiful things about these archives and about my relationship with Cora specifically is it just shows you that there's so many ways of following that inner voice and doing what it is that you feel you're meant to do and making a positive impact on whatever, type of path it is that you choose. And Cora was always cheering me on in that way. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful relationship to have. And I would go up to visit her, even in between travels, and we'd always just have sink into this same routine of making food together, making bread, sharing stories, painting, living slowly. And that was so counter to how I was living at Harvard or in my life after Harvard. It was very much a like, go, 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 do, do. And so to have this space where I could just fully be was beautiful and I think really essential to have that space to like rest and reflect as well.
Cora approached aging and death with such clarity. Do you think having that perspective changed the way you think about how you want to live your life?
Yeah, I mean, she was determined that after a couple strokes that she didn't want to continue living the way that she was living. And sometimes I look back on that and I realize that, it was a grace that she didn't have to go through the pandemic too, because I think that would have been an extra challenging time. But she decided to just stop eating and then passed away about a month later. And so it was this long, slow process of a goodbye and obviously really hard. But the memorial service was beautiful, especially just getting to meet people from different parts of her life who I'd never met before. And yeah, it's just we're all enmeshed in these webs of communities constantly. And I feel so grateful that our lives intersected in that way.
How was this relationship that it's not it's a different kind of relationship in the sense that she's not family? Was there freedom there?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with family, there's this sense of, almost think of it like layers of sediment, right? You know, many, many layers of a person over time. And so it's a deep connection, certainly, just a very different type of connection. Whereas meeting someone for the first time who's, at the age of being in their older years and me being so much younger, there was this kind of newness to it, I suppose, where we could be friends and just take each other as we were and not have the weight of all of that sediment as well. So it was definitely really freeing and so fun. And I think that there's just really value to creating those types of friendships because they can so strengthen our lives. And I think that the learning goes both ways. She was always telling me that I would say I was learning so much from her, and she said, "Oh, but you're teaching me things too, right?" So it was a beautiful, beautiful friendship in that way. And I think it's something that can just deepen the connections that we have even within our own families too.
How is it, meeting someone through the archives? It's like it's a foreign idea to many people.
Sure.
And I know you've done it. Do you encourage people to do this?
Totally. I mean, just whatever it is that you're interested in, chances are there's an archive that contains a wealth of beautiful information about that. And I loved poetry. And so I wanted to interact with people who were creating poetry in their own lives, right? But, whether it's cooking, like Julia Child's papers or the Schlesinger or, many different types of activism, it's just such a wealth of information that I think just really one thing that archives require us to do is just slow down and be present in that space and listen for whatever it is that they have to teach us. But I think speaking from personal experience, it can be really transformational. And so I would just encourage folks to give it a try because it's a way of learning not only about the past and a specific person in the past, because often the past feels like this abstract thing where it's sort of hard to understand, right? But tethering a person's life story to that moment makes it so much easier to engage. But then, yeah, there is this beauty where some of these folks are still alive, and what a gift that we can interact with them if they want to, right? So I think that there's just so much possibility there. And one thing that really, surprised me when I wrote this essay about Cora after she had passed was that so many people were reaching out to me, folks who had known Cora from different parts of her lives and wanted to connect, or people who hadn't known Cora at all but just wanted to be friends, right? And so I think there is this hunger that we have culturally to just connect across lines of difference, whether that's age or anything else. And I think that there's a lot of beauty there if we give ourselves the chance to try.
So, Debbie, now that the letters that you wrote to Cora are in the Schlesinger Library archives, what do you hope for researchers going through those boxes in your letters to her take away from your writing?
Um, I think that'll be for future researchers to decide, but I honestly, I don't even remember exactly what it is that I wrote. And I think part of it is just releasing that to the mystery of like, this is not for me. Like, this was a gift that I gave to Cora that Cora gave back to me, but then now is sort of out there for other people to interact with as they see fit. But it'll probably be a pretty candid, just what was going on in day-to-day life. But day-to-day life, like, it's easy to gloss over, like, oh, the mundane parts of living, they're not that interesting. But how we live our lives is built up of the building blocks of those day-to-day moments. And I'm not sure what they might find, but maybe something that just signals how beautiful and wonderful these friendships can be.
How does or did her outlook affect your own views on aging and death?
I think culturally, we just don't talk about death enough. It's this topic that's often feared. I think that through the example of Cora's life, I became determined to live my life in a similarly joyful, impactful, self-directed way, right? Which is not always an easy thing to do, but I try, right? I try to hold that lesson close. But I think it just gave me a bit more comfort with dying. And there was a moment, a couple years later where my own grandmother was dying in the early days of the pandemic. It wasn't COVID, it was a fast-moving lung cancer, but because of COVID restrictions, we wouldn't have been able to see her in the last days of her life if we didn't bring her home. And so my whole family rallied together and brought her to the living room. And we took turns holding her hand and massaging her feet and just being fully present in the reality of death. And, I was in the room when my youngest sister, who's now 13, was born. And it was sort of like that in reverse. I think there's a value in just showing up. And it was a hard thing to do, but a beautiful one. And I did the same thing just earlier this spring when my other grandmother was passing, and I knew that I wanted to be there in the room and be present for as long as I could and just say the things I needed to say, whether silently or out loud. And so in a way, like, dying can be a gift, right? When it's done in community. And I think one thing Cora did was she telegraphed that this was going to happen a long time before it happened. And so it gave everybody a chance to say goodbye. And then it was so beautiful also that memorial service, because I was able to just connect with so many people who I'd never met before, one of whom is still a friend who I'll be seeing in a couple of weeks. So there's I don't know, kind of these gifts that can be possible in that grieving process. But it was definitely hard to lose her. It's hard to lose anybody you care about. And I think that's, the hard thing about being alive sometimes is it's impermanent, right? One of my best friends is here in Vermont now, is 93. And I think part of why I'm able to show up for our friendship in the way that I'm able to is because I had this other amazing friendship with Cora, right? And they're so completely different people, but it's a similar kind of thing where I've learned so much from her, and also know that, life is finite, and at one point this will be really hard, but I think it's worth it. Obviously, death is still an uncomfortable topic, but I think the more that we talk about the reality of it, it just makes it easier to live a life with intention, because all of this is finite, and yes, we will be gone, but okay, accepting that fact, how can we make the most of our time here and express joy in every day and take the time to watercolor paint the postcards to send to friends, right? And do work that we find meaningful, or whatever that is. But I think it's given me an appreciation of just wanting to live my own life with intention and to carry that example forward for others. And then, hopefully I get to an old age where I can have a younger friend too, and just share the lessons that I learned from these really, really wonderful, empowered women.
Devi, thanks for sharing your story and your experiences with us today on Born Curious.
It was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
That concludes today's program.
Born Curious is brought to you by Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Our producer is Alan Grazioso. Kevin Grady, Anna Song, Lily Roberts, Emerson Prond, and Cabin 3 Media provided editing and production support. Many thanks to Jane Huber for editorial support. And we are your co-hosts. I'm Evelisa Strada.
And I'm Heather Min.
Our website, where you can listen to all our episodes, is radcliffe.harvard.edu/borncurious.
If you have feedback, you can email us at info@radcliffe.harvard.edu.
You can follow Harvard Radcliffe Institute on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads. And as always, you can find Born Curious wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for learning with us.
And join us next time.